Doesn't make me less nervous when I'm suddenly filmed.
That's the point. That's why these people are here as well.
And have Michael as a wing.
Oh, yeah. Or best.
Well, thank you for thank you for the floor, Mrs. Speaker. Mrs. So I said. Excuse me. Thank you for the floor, Mrs. Speaker, dear wings as well. We see a problem on this side of the house. We think that as an atheist, we have, or I have, the feeling of becoming a disenfranchised minority in a society where religion plays all the more a dominant role. So now, the first thing opposition might say, maybe in this case, no, it's not true. We are a liberal society. That's not a problem so far. We think it is a problem. Because what we observe in this sense is that there's a fear of immigrants. There's a fear of other religions, which we observe. There's a fear of what is different in our societies, even in Western liberal societies. We think this is a problem. And just as an example to mention, just a couple of years ago in Switzerland, one of the so-called liberal countries, there was a votation, a referendum on minarets, and Switzerland, which I'm a citizen from, decided to abandon the further construction of further minarets. So I think in this context, it's all the more the case as an atheist, as a person for which religion doesn't matter, is an important case to be made, something we should discuss, something on the basis I should act as an atheist myself. So we see concretely two problems. The first is that as an atheist, I don't have an institution where I can meet and exchange with people of similar thought of mentality, where I can talk with them, exchange, elaborate my arguments, just say, okay, why am I the way I am? Just feeling some kind of belonging, knowing where I belong to, seeing that there are people that think as I do. We think there's no platform so far where I can do that. We think we should change that. Second problem is that, as I told you, I'm becoming a minority. It is really that I'm pushed on one side as an atheist in that kind of society where there's that fear, where religion seems to matter, where suddenly we come back to that kind of Christian values. We say, no, it's important to keep to our values, to keep to our culture, and as a consequence, to stay away from everything that's different, namely, we're just Muslims, so to say. We think this is a problem. And we think as well that we don't want to become a minority. At that point, I personally, I have to act and to do something about that. So we think that this motion is a solution to this because it's going to organize and unite the voice of all atheists. And we think I should do, or I think as an atheist I should do that. Because what we have so far is just rather scattered individual voices who said, no, I'm an atheist, but there was no overarching organization. I think furthermore, I'll take a minute, that I have a duty as an atheist to join. It's similar to the gays. We think gay people have the obligation to join the gay rights movement just to make sure that they act against the intolerance that acts upon them from society. They have a duty to join in order to have a united voice so the society sees as well how many they are, what their arguments are, how they are organized in this sense. So analogous to the gay rights movement, I think as an atheist we should have something similar. I as well as an atheist have a personal duty to engage in that kind of movement. Please.
There is already for the past few hundred years an organization that deals with atheist issues where issues are brought up for debate. It's known as the academia.
Thank you very much. We don't think that it should be limited to academia only. There's no reason per se that we shouldn't open it and make it bigger. Just precisely by having that kind of atheist institution, the atheist church, which is open to all people who have that kind of liberal thought, we think that it's not limited to that kind of academic institutions. It should be open to everybody in this sense. We think even if there was, it hasn't worked sufficiently, and even if it was there already, I have to join now just to make sure that the voice is heard now in those times of mental intellectual crisis, so to say. I have two arguments for you. As I told you, we think that the need for a sense of community is important. That's my first argument. The second argument is about the atheist values, about the virtues, which we have in the definition slide, which are liberalism and solidarity. And we think these are very important while we stand for them. My first argument, there's a need for a sense of community. First, we have to say, well, what they're going to say probably, okay, all atheists, normally what they are egoists, they're individualists, they don't act for the collective in a sense. We think that's not true. We think the sense of community is central. Sense of community, sense of solidarity is central to our society, politically as it stands now. We think that it's really important, and that's why I, as an atheist, need to join. Because precisely to to have the kind of platform where we can develop the kind of solidarity feeling, where we can act together, where we have that united voice in order to act against the moral religious people in this sense. We agree on that, and we think that's the reason why I have to join, precisely because that sense of community is so important. That sense of community is important as well on a political level for society as a whole. We think that you have to engage with people who think the same way in order to make it better for whole society to see what people with certain thought, with certain mentality, certain ideology, so to say, well no, take it away, it's not an ideology, that's what I want to say, with certain traditional thought, how they speak to the rest of society in order to make sure that they as well, people who are religious, who are Christians, Muslims, whatever, they sit down, as well they see, okay, what do other people have to say in this sense? Furthermore, second argument within of the sense of community, we think there's an imminent danger of becoming a disenfranchised society, because what happens, minority, what happens if I'm disenfranchised as atheist in a dominantly Christian culture? What happens then is that I don't have the backing of the society. I don't have the backing of the institutions because people don't understand me, because people think you're a nerd, you're strange, you don't understand us. Because you don't understand us, we shouldn't take you serious all that much. Because once they see, okay, they are organized, there are more of them, they will be more probable to take us serious in this sense. What's the problem if we're not backed up by society and institutions? We'll be isolated. Concretely, if I see that all people around me who take the Christian values to be important, who say religion matters, who say that, okay, everything that's different, we should be skeptical about that in the first place, and I am the only one who say, no, that's strange, they're going to say, oh, well, you are strange, really, maybe we shouldn't talk to you. We think this very potential of becoming isolated within of society as a whole, within of a democratic society, is really dangerous. That leads me to my last point within of the sense of community. We think that we should have an institution that acts on a par with other existing religious institutions, be it the Christian church or other churches in a sense, precisely to provide a platform to speak with a united voice. My second argument, the atheist values. We think that liberalism is crucial to our democracy as it works, because we stand against dogmas of any form. We stand for the freedom of speech in this sense. We don't believe that liberalism is a dogma. We think liberalism is precisely defined through the fact that we withhold and abstain from any kind of dogma, and we discuss anything because we think that truth has to be lively, truth has to be discovered every day anew, truth has to be discussed permanently. There's nothing in this world which is settled forever. We should put everything on the table at any point so that it can be discussed. So, because we're against dogmas, we are for the freedom of speech, because we are a liberal society, for lively truth, but because we are as well a solidar, we stand for a solidar society where the sense of community matters, I am proud to propose this motion.
Yes. Madam Speaker, thank you for the floor. Friedrich Nietzsche once said, "He who fights with monsters must beware lest he himself becomes a monster." What we believe on side opposition is that these atheist churches are going to become just as bad as actual churches. We believe that what is bad about religion and the dangers that have come out of religion, persecution of the other, oppression of the other, dogma, groupthink, oppressive thinking, is not something that comes out of faith, out of a belief in some kind of greater power, which might be something which is very beautiful, but from the institutionalized institution of religion, which is exactly what it is, and that is what we're going to show you today on side opposition. Madam Speaker, while we recognize that atheist churches lack, let's say, a strong, let's say, enforcement mechanism, like a damnation to hell in a regular religion, then we still see that once you form this kind of a community, the threat of exclusion, of ostracism from this kind of group for non-orthodoxy is a sanction that forms a collective identity. I'm going to bring 2 points to you today, Madam Speaker. First of all, why this kind of atheist churches will still form like the kind of us versus them thinking that demonizes others in society. And secondly, about the power of rituals and why this is actually and why this is something which leads to horrendous effects. Before that, I have some points of rebuttal. Now, see, there's the large underlying assumption, which actually is asserted by opening proposition, but is never explained, and that is namely that atheists are an oppressed minority. We see in most Western liberal democracies that even though a large percentage of people are religious, that the elites in the society are not necessarily people who have a strong belief in God. We have just like my partner brought in a POI. We see that in academia, the assumption behind all sciences is that empiricism is the only thing that proves something, and thus what cannot be proven, and so what can only be like not disproven must not be taken as fact. Thus, God is dead in academia, and this is the norm. Evolution is the norm. Not creationism is not the norm the norm anymore. So we do not see why this is the case. Sit down. Okay. So when we talk about the fear of the different, I will show you in my first point why this is exactly what's going to happen under the atheist church. We also do not believe that this is like the LGBT movement, because in the gay movement, Madam Speaker, they're being proud of an identity that they already have. This is something that they are, in which they are an oppressed minority. They are a disenfranchised minority, but they're not dogmatic about it. They are accepting to one another as they are. In the atheist churches, as defined by our definition slide today, I'm going to show you why this is something that is going to become dogmatic. On a sense of community. If you want to have a community, you can form on any other hobby that you have, on any other thing that is important to you. But to bond around this ideology is something which is extremely dangerous, which I'm going to show you in my points. But the most important thing that the previous speaker said, Madam Speaker, is that liberalism is something that is important, and it is on this grounds and it's on this criterion that I'm going to show him why this is not something that is consistent with this proposition. I'm going to go to my first point.
Sorry.
No. Okay. Once in this church again, what is atheism? Atheism is the rejection of the fact that the purpose of human life is some kind of preordained plan. That what we're doing comes from above. That we are not in control of our own destiny. Atheism is the rejection of that. It is saying that the individual is at the center. That the individual is what gets to make decisions, and the individual gets to self-actualize himself. Now, what happens when you're in one of these churches? Once you have a manifesto of atheism, once you have a centralized holy text in this kind of movement, you become a centralized organization. This makes you part of a stream. You're no longer thinking of your own kind of atheism. You're thinking of a centralized form of atheism. Sit down. Now, this is this is just as bad because this helps you forming a collective identity through this kind of a centralized thing, which makes you define yourself by what you are not. You are not a believer in God. This is what defines you, not who you are, but who you are not. Now we think that this is bad because we also see in atheist streams that the more organized an atheist stream is, the more it turn against believers in God simply by the virtues of their own beliefs, of their beliefs. So you're now not judging someone as an individual with their own individual capacities, but you are judging someone poorly just because they believe in God. Go.
Do poor atheists have access to academia?
In most Western liberal democracies, yes. Okay, because of government-sponsored, etc. Okay. So we see that this leads to you bonding more about your non-belief in God, makes you reject, you have an absolute truth in this. Your absolute truth that there is no God. And this turns you against from people who have a different absolute truth than yours, namely that there is a God. These are incompatible things. This means you cannot see these people on the same playing ground as you anymore. And this is bad because it leads to demonization. That's bad. So to my second point on the power of rituals. In things like singing, and dancing and lectures that will happen in these atheist churches. This is something that doesn't happen just for nothing. In churches, this has been going on for thousands of years, and why? Because we've noticed since the time of the cavemen that rhythms and singing and singing serve a purpose of bonding people together in a trance-like state. This is what makes you part of a greater whole, makes you feel connected to the people with who you are rhythmically singing and dancing. This makes you less of an individual and more susceptible to sermons. We recognize, Madam Speaker, that sermons of like these crazy Baptist preachers get their power not from the belief in God, but from the groupthink that comes from doing these things together and to come together as a group. This makes you lose your own moral agency, Madam Speaker, because you get a moral collectivism from what you're told from these centralized texts, from these preachers, from this manifesto, what is good and what is bad. This loses your moral agency. This loses your individualism. Seeing as atheism is all about individualism and pluralism. This is liberalism is what's important in atheism, which is pluralism, which is acceptance of the other. This causes you to lose that. We beg you to oppose. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the floor, Madam Speaker. Let me begin by saying that most of my rebuttal will be integrated, and that we as proposition do not believe that the whole new church, which is relatively very new, which has a manifesto based on liberalism, therefore can be debated, can be changed, and that all those things, that it does not make you force you to lose your moral agency. We're saying that this church, this atheist church, is actually a nice gathering, as if it was an AA meeting. It's very loose, it's very individualistic, people share stories. We're saying in this church we believe, in this church as an atheist we would join. Now, I'm going to talk about, first of all, how we're stronger together. This is a short point. I'm going to basically talk about the benefits of the church, right? Secondly, I'm going to talk about how the church as an institute, which they, as opposition, talked about, is actually quite a benefit. We're strengthening the church and its belief. Thirdly, I'll talk about how this is a moral duty of you as an atheist to fight against the antagonism that opposition talked about. Now, first of all, so a really tiny bit of rebuttal, right? Because the previous speaker here talked about academia and all those things, right? We're saying, first of all, academia does not force you to prescribe to certain moral values. And we're saying that you as a person without certain moral values may seem without a sense of direction, and you want to have that. So we're saying that if in a church like this, you might want to learn that, it's fine. As an atheist person, you want that. That's good. Give charity, be good, kind to people, lovely things, right? There's no problem there. Now, the main problem we do see, however, is not just overtly discrimination, it's also subtle discrimination. Telling to your family that as a Christian, you're going to a Muslim is a lot of support, a lot of understanding, people understand each other, but telling your Christian family that you're becoming atheist has a different problem altogether. You have no institute backing you up. And we're saying these subtle things are quite important. You should join the atheist church. Furthermore, there's also problems in the government itself, which sees you as kind of weird. Like, for instance, especially in America, where you have to put your hand on the Bible to swear that you're telling the truth whenever you're putting a witness trial, whenever you're put on witness, and all those things. We say these are kind of injustices imposed upon you by the government. You should fight this. Now, thanks, sit down. Now, the points, right? First of all, stronger together. Like the lovely things you learn about those moral values. Giving the charity is good, even though you're not a Christian. You learn about those other things as a possibility. But moreover, because this church is relatively new, its dogma is not imposed upon them, because you know that the dogma is based on liberalism. You know that individualism is very important. You know that these churches are, you know as an atheist especially, that the other churches, Christian churches, Catholic churches especially, focus too much on imposing their own identity on you, losing your moral agency. You know that this is the case. You know that these churches are based around circumventing this problem, and you know you can influence the moral agency and especially the value of the manifesto of liberalism itself, because it's liberalism, so you can debate it, you can learn it, you can reason to better heights of reason and argumentation, and you can learn new stuff, right? One of the atheist churches I went to was telling me about the Big Bang, how long it was ago, and all those things, and another one had a lecture about should we give the charity, yes or no, right? It's completely different, you can debate. Now, second point. part. You're strengthening the church and its belief, right? Because as I said before, this is a new church. It's open to interpretation. It's open to new influences. This is the right opportunity and the right moment to start influencing the church, to start having your own say and to reason and to make sure that the manifesto is improved to the point where everyone reasonably can agree with, or at least stays open for debate and doesn't become dogma. No, thanks, sit down. This is an opportunity for you to do that. Why should you do that? Why is this a duty to strengthen this church and its manifesto? Why is this so the case? Because they are acting as an institute. They're calling themselves a church to antagonize them, to have greater political power. But they're acting as an institute on the basis, the foundation of their power is on the basis of your very identities, a significant part of your identity, as an atheist. So they're borrowing power from your identity. Whenever they say, we atheists demand this, they're saying that you, in part, implicitly must agree with that. So if you are forgoing the opportunity to influence the dogma itself, what you're doing is you're allowing the church to forgo what you have to say about it, to forgo what you have to say about it over your own identity and what you find important. We're saying that no, you as a person should have the right and should definitely make sure that your own say and your own opinion and your own reasoning are not just implicit but explicit in there. So you should join the church. It's your duty to make sure that you as a person are heard. You as a person have the right and definitely have your say in society, especially when it is used in your own name for political purposes. Second half.
Could you please define what are the elements that define the core identity of an atheist and why are those different from other people in the society?
Thank you. It's you call yourself an atheist and you join a church, right? That's it. The church itself, as I said before, is the atheist church as defined in the definition slide. And furthermore, as I said, I gave you examples how the church looks like. That's it, right? Much like in a Protestant church, you can disagree with Leviticus and saying that, or in a Catholic church, you can be a Catholic and say, I disagree with Leviticus. I don't think gay people should be disallowed to marry. You could just still be a Catholic, right? But we're saying that because the church is new, you can still influence the moral manifesto. You can keep it open for debate. So whatever. So yeah. Last point about how it is a moral duty for you to fight the antagonism and discrimination in society. No, thanks, sit down. Because here the opposition talked a lot about, you're going to antagonize people. You're going to create a lot of hate about them. You're going to be demonized. First of all, that's already there. If you look at Fox News in America and every single conversation in the workplace about, oh, you're an atheist, let us save your soul, and you're not being a good person. Oh, and you did something nice. They implicitly try to tell you you're not a good person. You're not good people, right? We're saying this is subtle discrimination on a very deep level, right? We're saying, no, you should fight that, right? Because it's already there. This antagonism is already at its highest because religion in America, for instance, as a Western liberal democracy, is really high. We're saying, no, you have a duty to fight that. And this church can help you do that. They give you extra institutions, that you can ask friends to come over, you can have extra reasoning, you can have extra proof, you can learn all these things, but they'll also give you strength, they give you confidence, they give you a sense of community. No, thanks, sit down. Now, secondly, furthermore on this point, why do you have the duty to do this, to fight this antagonism? Why must you do this? Now, I'm going to give you this analogy, this parallel, no, thanks, sit down, this parallel to, for instance, you as a gay person who should have the duty to go to a gay pride parade in a very conservative country with threat of discrimination, threat of bottles being thrown at you. Why? Because you are in the perfect opportunity, place and time to fight for the rights of not just you, but those who are like you, those you identify with, those you relate with, those who are your friends, those who are your families, and those who might, one day become your partner. We're saying that this is something part of your identity. It's being discriminated against, it's being rooted down, people try to root it out of society through you. And we're saying that you are in the perfect opportunity, perfect place and time to fight this. It's as if like a little girl is drowning, you're the only one there, and you have to rescue her. Now, of course, you're not alone, but you yourself, as an atheist person, because you believe in this, because you believe, because otherwise you wouldn't be an atheist, you should fight for it. And we're saying that you have the moral duty to fight for this, because even though no one else does this, and this is the main point, right? If no one else does this for you, especially if you don't do it for you, you are explicitly responsible for the future discrimination, not against you, because you allow it to continue, but you're also directly responsible for the future discrimination of all the other people that you believe should actually have these values, who you believe should have like lovely lives such as you believe in. So we're saying that you are responsible because you have to fight for your own rights, you have to fight against the discrimination that you dislike so much, but also for the other people who are like you, who you care about, because of the values, liberal values, right? Who you care about, and all those things, right? So, in conclusion, what have we said? We said that you should join the church as an atheist person because the church itself allows you to have a sense of community, you can learn, you can debate, you can make sure that the church grows in the proper manner. We're saying that the church itself, because it tries to exercise on the basis as an institute political power, and it's basing its power on the identity of you should influence it, you should help grow it, improve it, make it better. And lastly, because you have the moral duty to fight it, even if there's antagonism, but especially because you are directly responsible for the future discrimination of your own rights and the people you care about in the future. For all those reasons, we beg you to propose.
You ready? Madam Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the floor. What I'm going to bring you today are 2 points. First of all, I'm going to speak to you about how this actually does not promote the atheist agenda, but rather harms the atheist agenda. And secondly, I'm going to speak to you about why this necessarily will become a dogmatic system. But before that, I have a few points of rebuttal. Firstly, now, the second speaker from government comes up and completely redefines what the church is, basically saying that it's a study group where people come together and talk with each other, which is not what it was defined by the first speaker, which is not what it was defined as downstairs. What the definition that we were supposed to use was a ritualistic place where people come together to sing, hear lectures, or as I like to call them, sermons, and share experiences, and whether it comes to the Atheist Manifesto, or as we can call it, the Dogma. Secondly, and this is going to go into my second point as well, the churches necessarily require a dogma in order to keep themselves together. They need to have a central theme onto which they're aligned, to not just be a study group, to have communal songs that you all can sing together. And I'm going to show you why this is particularly harmful. Moreover, he agrees that academia exists and it is a hotbed for atheism. So we say that atheism is actually so he agrees that there are very strong groups already promoting atheism without saying why the church and so will do it better. Then he goes on to speak about, well, you know, it gives great morality lectures, but we say that most of these morality aspects that he's speaking about are already, first of all, usually given to children in school, and you don't necessarily need to have a church to tell you that it's good to give to charity. Or even if let's say that you're a person who don't think it's good to give to charity, why should you join a church that says that you in order to be a good person need to give to charity? And then he comes with this amazing definition of atheism, which I'm just going to have to reject outright, saying that an atheist is a person who does not believe in God and joins an atheist church. We say that in atheism is inherently an individualistic position, which is a position in which you reject a higher power, be it a secular higher power or a religious higher power, which can dictate to you the dogma, which can dictate to you the moral aspects under which you should live. We say that an atheist is a person who chooses his own moral system, who picks and chooses from the system that he thinks best suits what his inherent sense of justice serves best. Okay, now let me go into my first point. What best promotes the atheist? How this actually harms the atheist agenda rather than promote it? Now, the government has come up to us and claimed that the only way to promote an atheist agenda is by joining a church. Now, we say that this is inherently wrong, because we already have very strong atheist groups around the world, working as lobby groups, working as lobby groups, working as other forms of pressure groups that do not involve the ritualism of churches. Now, what we want to see here is what actually happens to, let's say, what I'm going to call the non-singing atheists, the atheists who don't join the church. Because when you join this church, you by definition become part of an in-group. Now, by becoming part of an in-group, you define people who are not part of this in-group as an out-group, as people who are not like you, who are unlike you. Therefore, you have less of an incentive to fight for the rights of atheists that are unlike you, that are not within your church. You're more likely to fight for your church to be in a better position rather than for people to be in a rather than for people rather than for people as a whole to have a more atheist society. And we say that more than that. They will necessarily have to be antagonistic towards other churches, because they're even more an outgroup. However, if opposition comes out and government comes up and says that the role of an atheist is to fight organized religion, we say that even if that is the case, this harms this ability as well, because if by forming yourself as a church, you accept that the church structure, the structure of organized religion, is one which is acceptable, which is one which is good. Thereby, you can no longer argue against that. So we see that, first of all, it doesn't help the majority of atheists. It only helps those within your church. And you're actually going to have to antagonize against others in order to make them join you, because you want to become more powerful in a bigger pressure group. It's also going to have to cause a greater rift within society between between atheists and religious people, because by necessity you'll have to fight others for power. And also, it's going to even weaken your position to lobby government in order to. It's going to weaken your position to lobby government to reduce church power, because you are now a church. Closing, do you have a POI?
Okay, so in an atheist church, you could have a lecture on Kant, and the next day a lecture on Nietzsche and his morality. We're saying that how is this being taught in high school, and how can there be no debate when you're basing your very foundation on liberalism itself?
Okay, thank you. Well, first of all, you can't teach Nietzsche and Kant in high school. That's number one. Secondly, what we say is that inherently in this is also the idea of rituals. It's also the idea of having an atheist manifesto. By agreeing to having a manifesto, you're actually agreeing that there is a central tenet that you. But even if you teach Nietzsche and Kant, you might not teach Hegel. You might not teach another philosopher, because you, as the church leadership, actually can pick and choose which philosophers or which philosophies you think are correct. And that's exactly what I'm going to speak to you about in my second point, which I'm getting to now. Why it will necessarily have to be dogmatic. Okay. Now, basically, when we create a church ruled by somebody. We create a central power within this church. Now, what government says is basically that we want to be an early mover in this church. We want to be one of the people who can come in and influence this church so it has the same ideals as us. And we say that what you're doing then is not that you're fulfilling the duty for all atheists. We're saying that you're fulfilling your duty towards maybe yourself to increase your own power, but at the same time, you're harming the position of atheism as a whole, as I showed in my first point. Because once you have a central power, this central power has it necessarily within their power to choose which philosophers should be taught here, what will be said in their sermons. Moreover, they have an interest in keeping their power, because that's basically the idea of most people who come to power will stay in power, because generally they gain from it. Because this church will have to be paid for somehow. So I'm assuming that there will have to be some kind of tithe. Now, by tying people into this system, by tying them into this religious ceremony or quasi-religious ceremony, by these rituals, making them feel as an in-group, that ever more strengthens the people who are at the top of this pyramid. Because that's essentially what this is. We're talking about a pyramid scheme, and the people at the top have the power to influence the people at the bottom. And what they're saying is, we as early as possible want to get into this pyramid scheme. What we are in opposition saying is that atheist churches are wrong, organized religion is wrong, we're becoming the monster that we're trying to fight. What have we brought you today? First, we have spoken to you how this actually harms the atheist agenda and atheists as a whole. And secondly, we have shown you why this necessarily will be dogmatic and harm you as an atheist and harm atheists as a whole. And for these reasons, we beg you to oppose. Thank you very much.
Madam Speaker, just let me take a wild guess at guessing that this is one of those open person motions that we were warned about. So our case is basically going to focus on why I believe this is good for the atheists to join the atheist church. Also, let me say how proud I am to propose this, since I've been a believer that has been going to church every Sunday, and I believe that going to church is very important. I had to say that my mom might see this later. Sorry. Okay, now, firstly, I'm going to speak about why we believe that atheist churches are not going to lead to any of the disadvantages that religious churches bring because they're fundamentally different from one perspective, i.e. they don't have a deity. Secondly, that I'll speak about how this also promotes actually the purposes of atheism. Thirdly and fourthly, about the benefits of being in an atheist church, A, on the point of community, B, on the point of how it helps individuals get in touch with their spiritual side, which we believe is very important even for atheists. But before going there, let me go on the point of how these are different from churches. Basically, first off, stands up and tells us that this is bad, because if you have a church, you will have dogmas, and dogmas are bad. Well, we refute that. We don't believe that dogmas are necessarily bad. We believe that some people are able to debate anything, and some people are able to have a very liberal point of view, and some people are able to take anything from anything. Some people are not. Some people just need a strong stance in order to tell them why they should be good persons. Some people are not educated. Some people don't read 10 philosophers. Some people actually might benefit from people telling them why they should act as moral persons. Some people might benefit from somebody sending them a strong code of conduct, a strong moral code. We believe dogmas are not necessarily bad. We do agree that they are bad when dogmas get to the point when saying that anything different means that it's bad. But we believe this won't happen for two reasons. Firstly, because dogmas aren't undebatable. We see that even in churches where dogmas have been around for thousands of years and where believers were told that if you don't believe this, you will burn in hell for the rest of your life. Even in these type of environments, people have changed dogmas and people have debated dogmas. We believe that's very much more likely to happen in atheist churches where you're not told that you're going to burn in hell if you don't believe these dogmas. We also believe that just as well as we have very different types of Christian churches, we might have very different types of atheist churches. For atheists that think Kant is right, atheists that think that other philosophers are right. And lastly, on their point of persecution, they say that once you have institutionalized religion, you will have persecution because religion says that all others are wrong. We don't believe that. We believe that institutionalized religion did help with creating persecution within religions, but it was only a catalyst. It was not the reason. The reason why persecution happened is that believers thought that everybody that believed in a different deity from their deity were wrong. They believed that they had a moral obligation to bring salvation to all of their believers. And they saw people that preached other deities as being a threat to that. They saw people that preached other values as being a threat to the salvation that they offered to the members of their church. That's why they needed to fight against that. In atheist church, nobody fights for the salvation of your soul because nobody believes that a deity can offer that. That's why atheists will never see other churches as a threat on that level. That's why atheists are not going to be persecution like other churches were. Now, on the purposes of atheism, we believe that churches do have some benefits. We believe that churches help people gather together, get in touch with their spiritual side, be better persons, offer a code of moral conduct. We believe that churches are only wrong insofar as they are discriminational. They say that all other deities are bad, and you need to belong to our deity in order to gain salvation. We believe that this helps the purpose of atheism because it sends the message that you can get all the benefits that the churches do offer without having to be segregational and discriminatory by only taking one deity. We believe that also on the point of how this weakens the position of atheists to fight against this institutionalized church, that's fine. Atheists don't need to fight against institutionalized church. They just need to fight against the idea that you need to have a deity in order to be a moral person. They're just proving that even without the deity, atheists can be perfectly moral persons and have basically the same behaviors. I'll take a point from opening.
Okay, but atheism is what you don't believe. When you organize around this, you organize around your hatred for religion. That's organizing on an antagonistic principle, necessarily demonizing the other. So why is this church better than a lobby group against religion, if that's what you want?
No, atheists do not demonize the others, and atheists do not gather around antagonizing other churches. Atheists simply don't believe that there is a God out there. Atheists simply don't believe that you need a God to offer you salvation. Most atheists don't even believe that there is salvation. That's why they are different, not because they demonize churches. In any way, you didn't prove that point anyways. Secondly, why it helps you integrate in a community. We've already heard from first prop on why they believe that having a feeling of community is good. We're going to add on that and tell you what this particular type of community is beneficial for atheists. Because like it or not, individuals are not self-segregational people. People need to have a group, a collective of people they belong to in order to interact with other people. People are social beings that need to interact with other people. And they are going to gather in a group whether you like it or not. We believe that churches are a good kind of group that we want people to gather around because churches bring people together from very different broad spectrums of society. Rich people can be atheists, poor people can be atheists as well. We believe atheists or a belief, whatever the belief is, brings them together. We believe this is one of the main advantages of churches, be them religious or not, that it brings people together from very different strata of society. We believe that atheist church might as well provide that. And to this they say, yeah, but you lose individualism. Well, firstly, individualism is not a core value of atheism like they presented. There are a lot of atheists that are socialist. Atheism doesn't reject any superior entity, it just rejects a supernatural superior entity. That doesn't mean that atheists need to reject any type of institution. And secondly, individualism is not lost. Individualism doesn't mean that you need to self-segregate. It just means that you need to focus on yourself more than on another deity. And thirdly, on the point of helping atheists get in touch with their spiritual side, we believe that atheist people still are spiritual people. Questions such as who we are, where are we going, why does life exist, still are questions that even atheists pose to themselves. We believe that atheist church provide a perfect forum for these people to discuss these issues, for people to identify themselves with the values, to replace the 10 commandments at the source of being moral with a morals code that does not rely on the deity. We believe that's fantastic. We believe that academia is not enough to provide that because academia is not accessible to all the state of society. Even if it's actually accessible, poor people and uneducated people rarely engage in academic debates. We believe this creates a perfect forum for the whole of society in order to get in touch with their spiritual side and self-actualize, whatever that word might be. And I always thought it's a euphemism for masturbation. Oh, I'm on camera, sorry. For all these reasons, propose.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So I'm going to start by rebutting a bit of what we heard from the member of opposition, and then I'll get into my arguments. So the first thing is he talks about how we're not, the dogma in itself isn't necessarily bad, that this dogma will somehow be different because people will be able to debate it, and that debating dogmas will somehow allow us to avoid all the problems with it. I think that's, and my team thinks that's completely false. You have all sorts of conclaves and churches throughout history that have argued the debates on theological issues, but they've still had all the harms that come out of it. You still have all the problems that come out of it. You have wars that based on it. The other thing is he says, well, it's because what's different here is there's not the threat of salvation. There's still other motivating factors beyond salvation that will cause these institutions to war with one another. So basically, what you have is if it's not about salvation, it can be about money, or it can be about who has the most members and who can therefore have the biggest voice in the public sphere. So what we see is it's not the souls but dollars, and that these types of institutions, they'll be able to fight amongst one another, even if salvation isn't the primary issue. So basically, you can make a comparison to, oh, let's look at Sunni and the Shia. They're both Muslim communities, but nevertheless, they find lots of reasons to argue with each other, fight with one each other, have wars. So if we have atheist group A and atheist group B, we think that same type of dynamic can exist. Or whether it's between Christians, you have different groups of Christians. In the same way, you have 30-year wars, and you have wars to try and get converts. We think in the same way here, if you have these two different atheist groups that are trying to compete with one another, there'll inevitably be conflict. So this brings me into the first thing I want to talk about. I want to analyze a bit more about who the atheists are. And I think when we look at who the atheists are, we can see why they want to avoid any of this type of connection. So the first thing I think it's important to realize about many atheists is many atheists are not born atheists, that many atheists are growing up in some sort of church environment, some sort of religious community, and because of their experiences within that church community, they come to reject it. Now, reasons for rejection can be many. One, they may find that they're not able to, their questions are not being answered in the way they want, or that they're feeling oppressed and their choices of how to live their life is very well constricted. So we think that they then see a parallel between any type of organization that has a dogma to reinstating this, becoming part of this organization again, that it's inherently in these, the structure of these organizations that they'll create the problems we created. Also, too, we see that some people come to reject their religious institutions later in life when they start having, for example, in a couple, one of which is one religion and the other which is another. So you might have a Jew and a Christian, and then this creates a tension within them. So in the same way that the problems that they have of integrating a family or trying to overcome these theological differences, they don't want to join a group with atheists where it's I'm atheist A and I'm atheist B, and now we have all these problems of integration again. So there's an inherent distinction between these types of groups. The other thing is that when many of the atheists, when they reject churches, they also want to reject the larger idea that religion has to be the defining aspect of our lives. By becoming a church, by becoming some institution, joining some institutions like a church, they're buying into this world that everyone has to fit into some category in response to what their beliefs and the higher, like the supernatural is involved in. Now, we don't think, atheists, many atheists say that's not what we want to do. We don't want to be defined in this world. Now, this comes into some rebuttal of what we were hearing before from the member of government, or where it's, oh, well, there's certain benefits here. You might have a sense of community. You might have some sort of learning opportunity. We see many atheists don't need that in a church environment, that there's clear alternatives. You see an increase in the number of things like sporting event clubs that allow people to have this sense of community. Or you have all sorts of learning environments that are outside of a church organization. Coursera, things that you can find on the internet. So these type of benefits that they're offering are not unique to the church. They basically say you can have your cake and eat it too. And we say, no, that's not the case. Well, the people have had that cake and they say, no, I get fat when I eat it. So I'm going to reject that. I'm going to try and have the low fat, still good taste, but no problem. Yes, open.
Yeah. What alternative do you have as an atheist to fight against discrimination so pervasive in society without an institution backing you up? No one has reacted.
Okay, so I can react to that if you feel like it hasn't been reacted against already. This is also going into this fits, I think, within the idea of playing into this religious world. They gave an example of Fox News, and Fox News is saying, oh, the atheists are bad for these reasons. We actually think when you organize atheists in some sort of group and allow some group to speak for them, that it's easier for Fox News to demonize them in this way. Now, when you have hundreds of thousands of different atheists, and there's a very minimalist set of characteristics that might define them, it's very hard for these groups to say, oh, look at this document that the atheists just published saying something that is contrary to our beliefs. It's easy to pinpoint on that. And why is that particularly problematic? Because whenever you have an organization, there's a particular subset of people that will be able to make those type of decisions. So when you have that small subset of group, it may not correspond to your own personal beliefs. So then what's worse is not only you're getting demonized, but you're not getting demonized for something that's not really your belief. Yes, Beck.
Can you name any other community that atheists can belong to that firstly bring people together from the broad spectrum of society, and secondly create a forum to debate spiritual and moral issues?
Yeah, I think the family is one, kindergarten, parent-teacher groups is one. You have all sorts of organizations. You have, for example, alumni organizations. Here, one of the concerns was about cross ages. So cross ages can be addressed in alumni organizations of communities. So we think there's many alternatives. Mr. Speaker, what we say is that when we look at the atheists and we look at how they're formed, that many of them go against this idea of the church, that it hurts their individuality, that they've experienced the problems in and of themselves, that these problems can have effects on the individual level, for example, in marriages, that they don't want to play, secondly, that they don't want to play on this, buy into this religious worldview that everyone has to have a belief on the supernatural, that there can be more important things in life, or things that are just a whole life orientation that is distinct and different from the supernatural, and that the idea that you can have your cake and eat it too, we think is false, and for all those reasons we beg you to oppose.
No, mister. He's quite feminine.
I just listen to both. So.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I'd say.
Okay. Thanks for pointing it out. Good week. Okay.
I just don't want to be held accountable for anything that's happening. Just clarify.
Okay. So, can I? Yes. Okay, so Mrs. Speaker, if first government tried to prove today that there is a moral duty of atheist people to become part of these communities, of these churches, today our team tried to focus on the benefits for the individual, on the benefits of becoming part of the church. And in my speech, I'm going to explain which are the advantages of becoming part of a church, and then I'm going to tackle the disadvantages that these two teams have brought into this debate. But before that, 2 points of rebuttal. Firstly, they said that every time you have competing groups, you have conflict, no matter the reason. Doesn't matter if it's a religious reason or money, or they gave many other examples. This is false for 2 reasons. Firstly, because we have in the society debating clubs that are competing against each other. We have firms, we have sport teams that are competing against each other, and the fact that they are competing against each other does not necessarily mean that that this leads to a conflict between these two, the two parts of the group. And secondly, the reason why in this particular case that led to conflict is because there was a need to protect for salvation. Or in Athens, we don't have that idea of salvation, because the idea of salvation is not a core value of atheism, and is not an idea that atheist people are believing in and are willing to fight for and willing to stand for. No, thank you, not yet. Secondly, they offered us some alternatives. And when Colin asked Apio about if they can offer some alternatives, they said, well, we have the family. But first of all, in the family, we don't necessarily have only atheist people. In the members of the family can have different values, can have different religions, and doesn't necessarily mean that they can discuss the principles that they can discuss in atheist churches, because they may be in conflict. And secondly, in the family there is a reduced number of people that you have lived all your life, while in atheist churches you have thousands of people that you can interact with, coming from different economic groups, different social groups, which brings lots of other advantages that I'm going to talk about right now. No, thank you. So, what are the advantages that we have brought into this debate? Firstly, they become part of a community of people that are all atheists, that are all non-religious persons. 3 advantages here. Firstly, the church is a place for exchanging ideas and debate and discussion by the simple fact that people interact with each other. This creates a premise for finding your identity, for tackling your spirituality, for adopting a code of moral values that otherwise it is less likely to happen. Secondly, they develop a sense of belonging to a group. They can receive support. They can ask for support when having problems. People need to feel cared about. That's why they surround themselves with family and friends. This is an intrinsic issue of the human being, that they need to be with other people. They need to feel part of a group. They need to interact with each other. They need to identify with other people in order to be able to identify with themselves. And thirdly, because it helps develop empathy, because it is much more likely to empathize and to understand the other people inside the church, because in your real life, if you're not part of this group, you choose your friends, you choose your person that you surround with. But in the church, you are forced to interact with many other different types of people, which means that it is much more likely to be able to empathize with different categories of people. No, thank you. Second point, it improves the image and the concept of atheism in the society. And we believe that we actually went further with their argument about why it's a duty to become part of the church, because we said that it sends exactly the message that atheism is trying to promote, and which is the fact that you don't need religion and you don't need a God to benefit of all the advantages that the church offers as an institution. You don't need segregation to exist, and you don't need you don't need isolation to function properly as an institution. Secondly, because atheist people have a negative image in the society. They are awfully seen as people that don't have moral standards, or they have a less moral behavior, exactly because morality is usually associated with religion, with Christianity, with Muslim religions, or with other religions, or because of the fact that this type of people start to going to church meetings, start to become part of church group. This means that other people will start to see them as associate them with morality, with a certain type of principle and moral issues that the church in itself promotes, by the simple fact that that they have this dogma, that they have this set of values. Yes, sir.
Okay, but Joanna, your burden is to show us why, as an atheist, defined as a liberal by the PM, you should congregate in a church with rituals, despite the harms that you've shown.
Okay, exactly. This is my third point. All the disadvantages that you brought. Firstly, why about the point about individuality, and the point about rituals, singing lectures, and so on and so forth. So, first point, they brought us as a disadvantage the fact that being part of a group makes you less an individual. Three answers here. Firstly, individualism doesn't naturally mean isolation and segregation. You can develop your individuality inside of a group. Secondly, individualism is not a core value of atheists, as Kalin explained. And thirdly, moreover, on the contrary, people define themselves based on what surrounds them. The more you interact with other people, the more chances you have of finding who you really are, and you can find out what you like, what you are, exactly by interacting with each other. And is academia the solution, what they said today? No, because it only offers a rational perspective. It doesn't teach you how to build a relation. It doesn't offer you human interaction. And secondly, even if it would offer, not all atheist people have access to academia, and we explained very well that the poorer people and those that live in lower social classes don't have access to academia. And second point, they said that the existence of rituals, lectures, singing destroys the idea of atheism and comes against their beliefs. We know that this is false, because the only common thing of atheism, of all atheist people, is the fact they don't believe in God. Rituals and lectures should not be associated with God and with religion, but with the existence of groups, because we have rituals, we have lectures in all parts of the society. We have when crowning a king, when you knight someone, when you made Obama president, we had a ceremony of putting him on that post. We have rituals and we have lectures everywhere in the society. This doesn't necessarily mean that these are associated to a specific point of religion and of God, and this is why this does not come against atheists. So for all these reasons, please propose this motion.
Yes. Thank you, Madam Speaker. What I'm going to do today is briefly bring 3 points of rebuttal along the lines of why salvation is not necessarily the core idea of the church being a source of salvation is not where the source of antagonism will derive in society. The fact that spirituality is less enhanced in a church environment, and I'm going to talk a bit about groups. But then I'm going to crystallize the debate around what the first half made it to be a church debate. Why is the church a bad or a good institution? And then secondly, I'm going to talk about this, and that's where the second half of the debate turned out to be to happen more, is why is this good or bad for atheists themselves? But first, my points of rebuttal. When it comes to why wouldn't we have antagonism within churches and within society if we have atheist groups, what the proposition brought to us today was that because there is no intrinsic idea of salvation, then no atheist church would have any incentive to actually create antagonism in society. We think that's intrinsically wrong. We think that's intrinsically wrong because the source of antagonism for today's society in an atheist church is not salvation but evangelization. What does that mean? It means that you as a church, any church, that's one of the main functions of the church, is to go and preach your ideas to other people. That's where the source of antagonism in today's society derives from in terms of church. Not the fact that you have an idea that is perceived to be superior, but that you have an idea, whatever that is, that you think is superior. In this case, is that there is no God, and you go and tell it to people that don't want to hear your idea. We think that any kind of atheist church will enhance discrimination, will enhance all sorts of negative approaches towards the atheist movement because of this idea that a church is associated with preaching your message further, and we think that's intrinsically wrong. We also think that church in itself is not the best place for having a spiritual environment because the church in itself has 4 basic features. It's a ritualized, rigid, homogeneous, and hierarchical environment. If you want to get further spiritual guidance, you don't go to church. That's the worst place to go to church, because what you'll hear there is a homogeneous message which within the atheist community goes against their core values, and we think that's wrong, and I'm going to tell you more about that later. Now, we also believe that the whole debate on whether groups are good or not good is besides the point, because churches are not a distinct, they're not any group in the society, they're a distinct group. And what makes this particular groups to be bad is exactly those 4 features that I mentioned: ritualized, rigid, homogeneous, and hierarchical environment. And we think that when it comes to those kind of groups, there is a potential danger for having certain homogeneous and hierarchical and actually I'll take it now.
Yeah, you say that the cause of conflict is evangelization, but evangelization only happens because religions believe that they need to save other people from damnation. That doesn't apply to atheist church.
Well, the basic, as the first government defined it, one of the basic ideas of an atheist group is that it preaches that there is such a thing as a truth. That's the basic idea that they will try to preach further in the community, and that's where the source of a conflict will derive from. But we don't think that atheists need that to feel that they're good atheists, because that's against the idea of being an atheist to begin with, as we have pointed out to you on this half. And actually, I'll move to my points of analysis right now. Now, the first half of the debate talked about the church. When it comes to talking about the church, we have to keep in mind the idea of a manifesto. And we think that we should crystallize the debate on whether a manifesto is good or it's not good for the atheists themselves. The arguments we heard from the first half was that if we have a manifesto, we'll be able to fight discrimination because atheists are minorities in our society, and this is the best way to deal with discrimination. Now, we think that's intrinsically wrong, because what that will lead to is a more enhancement for folks to bring a more demonized version of what the atheists are. As long as you have a community that praise itself to be a certain community and has a certain label, that will be the exact label for demonization. We think that's particularly wrong. And what the opposition brought you is that this is intrinsically wrong, because it will create a homogeneous idea of what being an atheist is, and it will create it will segregate within the atheist community, and we think that's very, very wrong. But further on, we have to bear in mind what happens with this particular individuals from the perspective of being an individual, an atheist, as myself, and I'll take you now.
Explain me how, if discrimination exists, how else am I supposed as atheist to fight it without existence for institution? Okay,
we believe that in this society there are 2 categories of people. There are people that, in terms of being an atheist, there are people who say they're atheists and people who don't say they're atheists. When people don't say they're atheists, there's no index, there's no label in the society, there's nothing that shows that you're an atheist. Those individuals that never say they're atheists will never be discriminated. Those individuals that say they're atheists are there to protect their own values, because the value of being an atheist does not derive from being an atheist as a label, but having certain values that you choose, you customize as yourself from being an individual, and you are able to stand for those values and not for the group of atheists, because every atheist is very different from the other one, but the values of yourself, and we think that individuals have the duty to stand for their own values, not for the values of this perceived group. Now, when it comes to being an atheist in a broader sense, we believe that the second half of the debate focused on this. The arguments that were brought for why is it good for an atheist to join the church are spirituality, community, and a sense of duty. I believe that I rebutted most of them in the first part of my speech, so I'm going to focus now on what we believe to be the core argument on the opposition bench, and that's where does the identity derive from when you are or you're not an atheist. And we think that identity, identity should be perceived in an environment where there is a lot of variation. We were led to believe the fact that atheists is this homogeneous group that has a shared value. We believe that both government sides had very different definitions of what an atheist is, and only that's very accurate and true. Because you don't have a homogeneous group of individuals that claim themselves to be atheists. There's nothing that derives from the sense. We think that it's so segregated, so customized, that you can't put those people together within a church, because you have pro-choice, non-evolutionists, evolutionists, pro-bank theory, non-bank theory atheists. They're so segregated. There's no such thing that identity derives for atheists from being an atheist, but from many, many other sources. So this is very important, because in order to have a religion, you go to a church because that's the core source of morality and identity for you. For any other religion, that's not the case for being an atheist, because the sources of morality, the source of identity derive from so many other things. We believe that it will be very different to create those churches because of the fragmentation. We think it's very harmful, because that creates the idea that there is such a thing as being an atheist, and that is not true. We also believe that the identity of being an atheist, if there is such a thing, derives from being anti-church, because the mechanism through which you became an atheist was through socializing yourself in a church environment and realized that ritualized groups are bad for yourself. It's against the idea of being an atheist to go to a church, and that's what's particularly harmful. We think we proved to you that identity is not the core source of being an atheist. We have shown to you that there would be antagonism in society, and me as an atheist would never go to this church because it harms my cause, harms my identity, harms the community. We beg you to oppose.